A warm welcome to all participants joining us today for our April WAS webinar. Before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. The session is being recorded and will be available for replay. Live translation is available in multiple languages, including Spanish, Portuguese, and French, and you can select your preferred language using the captions or the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. We encourage questions, so please type them into the chat or the anonymous Q&A box. So although we don't have a separate Q&A session, we will attend to those questions during the webinar as possible, and our team will also moderate them anonymously. Feel free to use the chat to engage, and our speakers during the webinar will also, as far as possible, engage with you in the chat option. So yeah, please keep those comments respectful and on topic. So for now, I hand over to Alain Giami, the Vice President of WAS and our host for today. Thank you, Alain.
Thank you, Elzette. Thank you, Michelle, for setting up this webinar that we expected for a long time. It's my pleasure. And first, I want to thank the speakers who have accepted my invitation to come and share their ideas and opinion about sexual justice. Just to remind that the Sexual Justice Initiative started during the meeting in Cape Town in 21, and it started with a big meeting, with an Indaba, which is a specific South African cultural type of discussion, and we collected a lot of ideas. Then we set up a steering committee to start to work and to prepare the declaration that was submitted and presented at the meeting in Antalya in 2023. And then we extended the steering committee and continued to work, and we are finalizing the technical document which will accompany the declaration. The declaration will be a little bit modified because of some stuff which needs to be more precise. And then, so here we are today to discuss with you about sexual justice. So as you can see, the panel represents an important diversity on many aspects, and I am happy to say, and I hope that each one of the speakers will speak with their own voice, their own voice, their own experience and perception and intellectual and political elaboration of the experience that we live at the moment in terms of injustice and backlash of justice, especially in the context of sexual health and sexual rights and sexual pleasure. So voilà. So I will present myself. So I am the Vice President of WAS and the chair and the co-chair with Esther Corona as co-chair with me. Thank you, Esther, for being here, coming back from New York. And so we started this experience, about 4 years ago now. But I want to say also that I am a social psychologist and an anthropologist, and I have been a researcher all my life in the field of sexuality, to understand sexuality. So my point of view is mostly critical. Some may like it, some may not, but here it is. So I will start my presentation. Voilà. Okay. So we have, sexual justice represents a series of challenges, and this is not the first webinars that we have. We had already one in 23. We had different symposium in different WAS and regional and national congress. So what we need to say is that sexual justice is a new political development in the strategy of the organization in WAS, which is meaning that we are more interested in the political and institutional dimension of sexuality beyond the professional, but we don't abandon the professional dimension. It's a political project based on scientific information and fact, based on the establishment of various partnerships all around the world with institution, organization, association, and individual. And the idea is supporting and promoting sexual rights and reducing limitation to the implementation of sexual rights. So there is no, I mean, sexual justice will not take the place of sexual rights. Sexual justice will be at the service of sexual rights in the situation in which the sexual rights are threatened, are not recognized and accepted, and in the situation where sexual rights are not granted for everybody in different situations. Why now? You know, this is why the title we gave to this session. We are facing unprecedented attacks against sexual and reproductive rights, including restriction of evidence-based comprehensive sexuality education, anti-gender campaign orchestrated by powerful lobbies, and in particular in Europe, Central Europe, and Latin America, without speaking of the United States, and the recent political situation in the US and threatens to academic freedom, freedom of speech, and autonomous research and publication. We face situation of war and armed conflict and ethnic cleansing in many situations, including Ukraine, Gaza, Palestine, Darfur, Central Africa, etc. We have a health crisis going on, including COVID is now at the moment the most emblematic token aspect, but we have malaria, we have dengue, we have still HIV, obesity, diabetes, etc. We have economic and climate crisis, shortage of resources, and inequalities related to class and colonial oppression and domination, which are increasing. The crisis, what are the impact of those crises on sexual rights and sexual health? The crises do not affect, and why do we need to have some justice approach? The crises do not affect every individual community in the same way. Sexual and gendered violence against women and girls, for example, in Iran and Afghanistan in particular, limitation of access to gender care for trans and gender diverse adolescents. And in the last couple of days, we saw that in England, the parliament considers that gender identity was only related to biological sex. And today in Brazil, there is a publication of the Federal Council of Medicine limiting the access of trans youth to medical treatment. We have restriction and cancellation of access to abortion and contraception services in places where it was considered for granted, without speaking the situation in which it is still forbidden. We have reduction and cancellation of ongoing funding and resources on research, and removal and restriction of access to books in libraries and databases. We assist to some important auto da fe, which means burning books. So we have a working definition, and I insist on the qualificative of working, because the idea of sexual justice is not to say truth. The idea is to raise questions. The idea is to facilitate people to ask the right questions, the important question in the situation in which they are, in order to modify the situation. So we have a series of concepts, that you can see here, that you can have access also on the WAS website, which you will have the link at the end of the of of my presentation. But you can see, I will give only the first. Sexual justice is a fundamental framework for achieving equity and reducing systemic inequalities in sexual health and rights. So, but what is important is what are, the objectives of this declaration. One is to ensure the maintenance, promotion, and respect of sexual and reproductive rights that guarantee everyone the right to pleasurable, satisfying, and safe sexual experiences, as defined in the declaration as approved by the major NGOs and UN agency, to all population, and in particular for the most discriminated against, stigmatized, and oppressed groups, to ensure access to sexual health services by reducing inequalities in access to care. And beyond the systemic nature of this exclusion, it's important to bring about a profound change in the representation, attitude, and prejudice. And I want to state that in a couple of days ago, the head of the Pascal Alote, the head of the Human Reproduction Program at the WHO, focalized her intervention on taboo, misconception, and prejudice as very important obstacles to the development of sexual health and sexual rights. So it's not only, the project is not only psychosocial, which means acting on the head, on the mind of people, but it's also to advocate for transformative justice, accountability, reparation, and healing for people and communities whose full citizenship and human sexual rights have been negated and violated. It's not enough to change what happened in the mind of people. We need to work to advocate with a political system and institution at this level. And this is important that WAS becomes a central actor in the discussion with different organizations and institutions. So first, by working to influence government institutions and international organizations to change laws, regulation, and health and education system, as well as judicial institutions. But the one important aspect that I want to add today in my intervention is to contributing to the training of sexual health professionals by integrating issues of sexual rights and justice into their training curricula and at the very heart, the very core of their clinical preventive and educational practice with a view to restorative justice. And I think, this is the DNA of WAS, which is working with health professionals. But this is not enough. And that's why we need to go beyond, the action that we have with the health professional. We can have some examples, of situation, in which we need to intervene, which kind of population, women of color, and the women of color and indigenous communities started more than 30 years ago speaking of reproductive justice, which is related to the reproductive rights, with the right to have or not to have children, and the right to decide when to have or have not children. We have the situation of sex workers, who are very problematic in many countries with prohibition and violence toward female, men, and transgender sex workers. We have the situation of transgender youth who are denied possibility to access to medical and psychological care. We have the situation of people incarcerated. And this is something, which at the moment is becoming quite dramatic when we see the situation developed in El Salvador, and nobody spoke about it until very recently. But El Salvador appears as a laboratory of dehumanization of people convicted. I am not defending the people who are convicted because they are all very bad criminals. But what I consider is that the situation is a situation of dehumanization, and I think a civilized culture cannot dehumanize, destroy people, even if they are considered as monsters. But this is becoming the model. And in France, there is a tentative also to establish to develop the model of SECOT, which is developed in El Salvador. We have the people with chronic and mental disorders, and also people who are living in organization, in total institution, in which their biological life is run by the organization who decide eating, sleeping, drinking, urinating, and defecting. So people lose the control over their biological rhythm, and this is also a violation of justice. But unfortunately, we have so many different situations going on. What I want also to add, since we focus on medical professional, is that the idea, the programmatic idea, that we could include that sexual justice is part of medical ethics. And as you know, we have the six principles of medical ethics, which include autonomy, justice, and dignity, which are the fuel, the food of sexual justice. So I want to say also, since I'm raising the issue of ethics, that sexual justice is not limited to a legal discussion as sexual rights are, and not to a legal discussion and field of action. It is rather an idealistic, visionary proposal to enhance human rights and liberties. It's to give some kind of ideal. We need to have a positive vision of what we want, what kind of world we want to have in order to monitor the action that we want to have. So just a few opening remarks. Sexual justice is justice. Sexuality can open access to justice, and limitation in sexual justice reveals absence of justice as principle to discuss. And I will finish my talk with a reference to Michel Foucault. I live in France, and I've been a student at the time where Michel Foucault was teaching, and he speaks of, in his book, The Courage of Trust. He speaks about paresia as a kind of disease in which the subject must take a certain risk in telling the truth that he marks at his opinion, his belief, a risk that concerns the very relationship with the one he is addressing. Paresia implies a certain form of courage, a courage that consists in the subject risking undoing the very relationship with the other that has made his discourse possible. The question is that if we are advocating for justice, we take certain risk because we take certain risk for safety, and we take certain risks also to disconstruct some of our friendship and alliance. Just to conclude, you can find the Declaration on Sexual Justice on the website of the WAS, and I want to thank you. You can contact us here, and I want to thank you for your attention. Thank you. Thank you. Now, I would like to call Ricardo Hernández Forcada from Mexico City. Ricardo has joined the steering committee of the Sexual Justice Initiative about almost a couple of years ago, and we've been working together. Ricardo is an independent consultant and human rights activist. He's a philosopher and ethics expert, with extensive experience in public health, HIV prevention, and social inclusion. Ricardo works at the intersection of human rights, diversity, and sexual justice. His topic today is some philosophical elements for sexual justice. Buenos dias, Ricardo. Nice to have you here today. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Alain Giami. I would like to talk about some philosophical elements to contribute to sexual justice, because sometimes there are some aspects of justice that are under debate that we should consider. Next slide, please. The first element, obviously, is the gender equality that should be at the core of the sexual justice, because it entails recognizing and respecting the rights and the dignity of all people, regardless their gender or gender identity. Since sexuality is a very important element of human nature as sexed species, and all the derivations that come from that biological reality conform the gender structure, we have to push forward in terms of justice for gender equality. The second element I want to remark is autonomy and consent. As individuals, people have the right to decide about sexual relationships. This means that all parts involved must give their informed and voluntary consent for any sexual activity. The concept of autonomy is also very relevant in the field of bioethics. It also refers to the consent for any intervention, any biomedical intervention that has to do with the sexual health. A third element is the respect for diversity. As Dr. Giami has just pointed out, there is a strong attack against diversity, genocide in several parts of the world, not recognizes transgender people rights, etc., etc., calls us back to reinforce this concept. Respect for diversity is crucial for sexual justice, to recognize and accept different sexual orientation, gender identities, gender expressions, and cultural context in the that refer regarding the sexuality of people. Next slide, please. Equality necessarily has a derivation, which is the right not to be discriminated. This is obviously fundamental for the sexual justice, because this entails avoiding discrimination based on any of the characteristics of the human beings regarding their sexuality, such as gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. This is one of the very most important aspects that have been threatened in the last months in our world. 5, this is something that a lot of sexologists and sex educators have stressed very recently in the context of Latin America, because sex education has been under fire by conservative groups. Is the access to education and information about sexuality and reproductive health, and involves providing accurate, accessible information about these subjects, including the sexuality and reproductive aspects of, and also the rights and the way to exercise them and demand them if they're violated. It is important that this kind of information has a scientific basis and is away from any moral or religious bias. 6th element, protection from violence. At the core of the sexual rights is the right to not being violated for any cause regarding sexuality. Protection from violence is crucial because it involves preventing and addresses sexual violence, harassment, or abuse. It is important in this point that public policies have effective ways for complaints and to demand justice and the way to guarantee it. Next slide, please. 7 is empowerment. Empowerment is central to sexual justice because it involves empowering people to make informed decisions about their own sexuality and reproductive health. It puts the human rights regarding sexuality in the hands and the will of every individual, of every couple, of every family, community, and they don't become only a reception subject that receives some kind of benefits, but a person that has the power to exercise its will regarding sexual and reproductive decisions. This is something that is being called sexual citizenship because it involves the capacity of exercising and demanding the sexual rights. An eighth element is the intersectionality that involves recognizing how different forms of oppression regard sexual justice, such as sexism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, and they intersect and affect people in very different ways. Next slide, please. 9 is responsibility and accountability. This involves holding individuals and institutions accountable for their actions and decisions that affect sexual justice. This is a very important part of the guarantee of any human right. If the institutions are not responsible or accountable for their decisions, we are lost in our way to demand sexual justice in order to achieve sexual rights. And the 10th one is dialogue and participation are fundamental because it fosters dialogue and participation among stakeholders, including those affected by sexual injustice. This is a very important principle of human rights that the people that are affected by any kind of decision, political, judicial, or legislative, have participation in the discussion on the making of these public policies. I want to emphasize a fundamental aspect of sexual rights that is that people really have the ability to access and enjoy them without any barriers. And if it is not the case, that there is a way to effectively claim them. This is an essential component of sexual justice, the possibility for people to have access to these rights and the guarantees to enforce them. These rights are fundamental across to clean water, sanitation, healthy food, or housing. For example, it is essential for the proper development of the capacities of every human being to have sex education based on scientific evidence, secular, free of moral, religious, ideological, or any other type of prejudice, and free of discrimination and violence. The same can be said about sexual health services, just to give 2 examples. So I want to emphasize that the sex rights are as important as clean water, housing, or health service in general. When obstacles are placed in the way of the enjoyment of these rights, and with these characteristics, we're faced with human rights violations, whether perpetrated by the state or by the government's failure to protect population from these acts committed by any other social agent, such as the media, other cultural products, religious communities, amongst others. Therefore, an effective sexual justice requires the existence of enforceability mechanisms, that is, means to recover and enforce those rights. This requires standards, justice mechanisms, and legal remedies the observance of these rights, that is, their actual fulfillment, the dissemination of these rights and the means to guarantee them, and effective state accountability to repair the harm caused by these violations. If we don't have all this, the sexual justice agenda is only rhetorical. The enforceability of sexual rights, like human rights, refers to the ability of people to claim and enforce their rights before the authorities, institutions, and organizations. This concept implies that sexual rights are not merely declarations or abstract principles, but the most effective, accessible, and enforceable in practice. Next one. Just to finish my presentation, I want to remark 5 dimensions of the enforceability of human rights. First is normative. Sexual rights must be established in international laws and treaties which provide them with a legal and normative framework that you can refer to when you claim them back. Second, effective access. People must have access to justice mechanisms and legal remedies to claim their sexual rights. All barriers that impede access to this justice must be removed, such as discrimination, physical or moral violence, distance, lack of access to information technology, lack of accessibility for people with disabilities, amongst others. Third, effectiveness. Institutions must have must be able to enforce laws and ensure that sexual rights are respected and protected. 4, awareness. It is essential that people know their sexual rights in order to adequately demand them. 5, states and responsible actors must be held accountable for sexual rights and take measures to remedy them. I have 3 minutes, but I have already finished. I want to thank you very much for your attention and patience.
Thank you very much, Ricardo, and thank you also for sparing some time, which is always appreciable, but this gives some time to reflect on the intense and very important background, conceptual background of sexual justice. Now I want to invite to the world Agata Loewe, who is going to speak of sexual justice and practice in Poland. Agata is one of the founder of Sex Positive Institute. She's a psychologist and sexologist. She's a systemic therapist and educator specializing in gender and sexual diversity. She leads training, research, and advocacy to promote sex-positive and inclusive practice in Poland, and will share more with us on the topic of sexual justice in practice in Poland, which is a situation which is not very under scrutiny by observers of sexual rights and justice. Thank you, Agata. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much for having me. I will be speaking from a place of privilege because Polish context is very interesting, but I do acknowledge that it's just one spot on the map, and the global sexual justice situation needs definitely addressing. I'm greeting you currently from Istanbul in Turkey, and I'm trying to connect the dots between Poland and Turkey and cultures, kind of building a bridge between radical or even traditional, or more proper would be traditional countries based on religion, morality, also bridge between Eastern and Western world, and having interesting cultural context. But being here now, it makes me wonder what are the similarities and differences, and what are the needs, and how to bring sexual justice in places like those who don't have English as a first language, or English is something that people not necessarily use to read or to get education in. and how those beautiful and important notions are being brought into those grounds, and how they are being applied in different cultural and also religious contexts. And as I'm new to Turkey, I won't be speaking from this perspective, but for years now, I've been trying to build and co-create a place called Sex Positive Institute in Poland that is kind of a baby that is trying to incorporate this kind of challenges that we are facing in human rights division and sexual or social justice. So Poland is in European Union since 2004, but we can't forget that this has been a land that has been living under different oppressors throughout the centuries. I would not compare it to colonialism, but definitely Poland and Polish people at today's era are struggling to build their own identities depending on in which region of Poland you were brought up, or where the families has been moved throughout after First, Second World War, or through Soviet Union times. There has been huge impact of foreign impacts on the culture, and there's a lot of trauma that is being processed. I'm also a family systemic therapist, so I do hear those stories and how families are trying to struggle to incorporate those notions between generations that are trying to be more liberal, and there are definitely very strong traditional values in the country. And while we could take an angle of abortion, which in Soviet times was legal and quite liberal, that much Catholic Church in this time has been very strong as an opposition against the political system. So it became a little bit mixed how the freedom of abortion is now linked to the communist oppression, and how the value of life has become a Catholic notion, as a notion of freedom from the political oppression. At the moment, Poland is definitely struggling with human rights regarding the sexual and reproductive rights. We have had one of the most radical abortion laws in Europe and in the world, not to mention other areas that has been also quite quite problematic, like LGBT plus rights. We have had in Poland LGBT plus free zones. We have been having activists fighting for gender and sexual orientation rights for years now. And while there has been huge progress in Poland, at the same time observing the backlash in Western countries, that has been quite depressive to be observing that the aims and hopes of activists like me has been going in opposite direction for people that has been serving as good practices and hopes and dreams for many of our citizens who has been running away to find safety and to find some peace. There has been a lot of advocacy, a lot of prevention, education, and we've been working a lot around how to bring sex positivity through different initiatives that would be showing that there's a declaration of pleasure that is a part of sexual rights for people. But at the same time, there has been COVID, there has been wars, just as Alain was mentioning, that the international context, the context of economical crisis, where Poland on one side has been having economical growth, but at the same time there's a global economical crisis that has been broadening the differences between people who have access to education, to health care, and to a peaceful life. And Poland has been quite homogeneous country for many years. People in the country would consider themselves as a white population, Catholic population with similar values that would be quite sexist, patriarchal, and heteronormative. That would be a value for Polish people to be presenting the illusional majority of its people. So it's very interesting to observe how it has been changing when we add the lens of intersectionality and bringing the sexual justice by providing knowledge of intersecting identities that are not only present but also trying to thrive in Polish country. Such as people with disabilities, people of different ethnicities and skin colors, religions, and immigrants. That is a big topic in Poland at the moment. So when I asked my friend, what is sexual justice in Poland? She asked me, what's sexual justice? And we definitely need to focus on finding equal access to sexual and reproductive rights and freedom from discrimination and bodily autonomy. And I would be hoping that in future we will be continuing the international cooperations, and we do notice the cuts of the funds that are happening also in other places. And we do see that as much as a couple of years ago, there was still huge push to educate people on STI transmission, HIV transmission, and now the possibilities of preventive methods. This has been very much reduced. And of course, there's a huge anti-gender movement also happening through the religious leaders in the church institutions, shaping morality and undermining the work of many people involved in this activism. So let's hope that I want to stay positive because, as I said, we've been looking up to European Union and European standards on Western standards, and now I see that we are having to go hand in hand together, and also definitely not forgetting about the rest of the world, that still this is a very privileged place to be fighting for human sexual and reproductive rights.
But thank you.
Unless there are any questions or any comments, I'm happy to
Okay, we shall collect the question and then go back to you at the end after all. But thank you for managing to be with us. I know it was not easy for you to be with us. Thank you, Agata. Now I want to introduce our next speaker, Denise Medico, who is both from Canada and Switzerland, but I must say also from Italy at some point. Yes, Denise is currently a professor at the University of Quebec in Montreal at the Department of Sexology, which was, everybody must know, that the first specific department in sexology in the world, which started in the end of the 60s, and it is still a very important place with a renewal of the professorial group. She's a psychologist and researcher, and her works focus on embodiment, gender, eroticism, and affirmative clinical approaches. She promotes reflective and inclusive, and I would say anti-oppressive sexology practices across culture. She will speak today of the topic of sexual justice in clinical sexology, which is exactly what we wanted to have part of the discussion, how to include sexual justice in the core of the clinical practice.
Thank you, Alain, for the very nice introduction. So as you heard, I come from two countries. I live in 2 countries of the global north, which are privileged. So, which come along with also with a lot of space and to reflect and think. And my job is to develop and implement sexual justice in clinical sexology. And as you know, I think it would be very difficult not be knowing of that now. These are the words that have been banned by the Trump administration. And if you have a quick look, you will see that sexual justice is everywhere in these worlds. So we are in a moment that is very dangerous for sexual justice, and where sexual health and sexology is targeted. And so is the lives of many gender diverse, sexually diverse, relationally diverse person, and even of people who work with them and stand along with them. I am especially, many of my research is on with gender diverse people, and it's a few years that we feel that there is a threat, that we have violence against us. So the climate is not new, but action are now. Oh, sorry. What I will try to develop is here today is how to have a coherent frame for clinical sexology to be focused on sexual justice. But just a little bit of, just before that, a little bit of context. Even if I work in 2 privileged countries, we experience in the field, we experience in our clinics. I also work as a clinician with other clinicians. The climate is changing. Fear and anxiety is now common among us, and even more among our clients. We have an increase of mental health problem, especially in teenage girls and youth people and people from the gender diversity. They experience more violence even than before. We have to deal with suicide more than before. We are overflowed. There is a lack of resource. So this is a very important moment for sexual health and sexual justice, I think. So to develop a clinical frame to teach to students and to work as clinician, we need to be rigorous, and we need to implement our practices, our treatment goals, methods in research that needs to be critical and participative. In our reflection on ontology, so what are our concepts? What is sexuality? What is the subjectivity? What is the relation in therapy? And all of that has to be organized through a lens. And this lens is sexual justice that my colleague already have been talking about. I will also focus on the other part. So we need research and epistemology to evidence the bias that patriarchal capitalism is doing. And so has been done in the last 50 years. We have been, social science have made visible that injustice is present in society, and that is also present in science production. Many studies have outlined the normative biases that are inside even the social science and sexual sciences. We have concepts like epistemic injustice that explain us how some people don't have access to express and to testimony and to be part of the production of science. And this access is even more denied today. We have many researches that like social science also already, from Kinsey to the last study that we have in France, that report what sexuality is on the field, that allow us to have a more clear view on what is the diversity and what's very important in all this research is that since the 50s, it's getting more and more diverse. Diversity is normal now. Diversity on every aspect of behavior, of bodies, of pleasure, sexuality, gender, relationship, eroticism is not rare. Diversity is everywhere. And what's a myth and what's ideology is that there is just one script and just one way of being a man and a woman, and just one way of having sex. This is a myth, and this myth is pathological because it brings a kind of normosis, which is the impression that you're not normal, which increases anxiety, which increases depression, which increases mental health, which increases sexual health problems. So we need science and we need social science to be the basis of our work. Then ontology. We should reflect on what is the nature of the person. Let me give you an example. Rape. Sexual violence is something very common in clinical sexology. And rape is one of the sexual violence that which is quite common. It's very difficult to get outside the shame of what rape implies for the victim. It takes years, but it's very important to process in therapy to the idea that you are not the victim because it's you. You're not a victim because you have a problem. It's not a victim, but you are a victim because you are a woman or a gender diverse person. And it's a systemic tool to control you. And this idea, when you can come to change your narratives, it's a way of freeing yourself from what is shame and and the heavy burden of that. So we have to think as clinician, what is the idea of the self and the idea of consciousness, to really take into account that self and consciousness can be seen as the subjectivity is in fact something very intersubjective that we live because we are with others, and our relations are at the very heart of who we are. So is our body and our embodiment, which also is political. So we should reflect also on what sexuality and eroticism are, and to really think how oppression, violence, and destruction are maybe not outside of the eroticism and outside of sexuality, but are at the core, and how they intersect to really have a clinical practice that is situated and that means for people. And then our methods. One of the major things for our methods is to rethink the neutrality of the clinician. And I propose that instead of neutrality, we will think in terms of commitment. I'm committed to you to help you, and I'm committed to take into account how different oppression and how your identities built you in who you are and what are the possible of your lives. So rethink neutrality is something very important when you want to work in a sexual justice frame. So I promote affirmative and feminist therapy, and affirmative has been treated as something. It has been the target of many attacks, but affirmative means that you affirm yourself. So you work to go to a personal agency. And this means building a safer space for queer, gender diverse persons, teens, kids, women and men, everybody. Mainly work in a trauma-informed context where something is very important. It's the term of recognition. You need to recognize the burden. You need to recognize that in some places of your life you've been a victim. You need to recognize what happened, where are the events. And this is the very core of every psychotherapeutic work, recognition. And this is the beginning of being better with yourself. So you should address the issue of shame, which is so common in sexology, and go to foster mutuality and connection to oneself and to the other. And one tool I'm developing is the tool of sexual agency as an agenda, and to organize where we want to go. What's the goal of sexology? What is the goal of clinical intervention in sexology? And I propose sexual agency as a goal, which is a feminist concept that really thinks intersectionality and thinks society at the very heart of who you are. And I really like the concept, the way Abby Wilkerson, which is a creep researcher, a feminist creep, and the definition she gives. The definition is, I understand sexual agency not merely as a capacity to choose, engage, or in refuse sex acts. So it's not only consent. Consent is very important, but it's not only consent. But it's a more profound good, which is in many ways socially based, involving not only a sense of oneself as a sexual being, but also a larger social dimension in which others recognize and respect one's identity. So I think there are two very important things in this definition. The idea of a profound good, something you, or it's that is you own, the sense of yourself, your own agency. So it's very important to work psychotherapeutic in a psychotherapeutic setting, but also recognize that even if the other don't look at you as if you are someone, if you have some rights, you don't have them. You cannot be alone in this idea. Self-esteem is not a matter of you alone, it's a matter of what you do in society with others. And to have a more operationalized way to think sexual agency, because it's a wonderful concept that in clinical setting, what do you do? What do you do to foster sexual agency? But first, you need to look at embodiment. You cannot consent to any sexual act if you don't feel what is good or bad for you. And in clinical sexology, we have many, many people that are completely dissociated. They don't feel anything. How can they feel? How can they know what they need? How can they know if they like it, if they don't feel it? So we have to foster the ability to feel emotion and sensation and to have a positive body image. This is the basis of clinical sexology. Then we have to foster sexual subjectivity, which is knowing oneself's needs and desire, who you are in your gender, who you are in what you prefer in sexuality, who you prefer, what you feel, what are your sexual fantasies, what are your emotional needs. So you have to think and know yourself. Then you have to foster the capacity to affirm yourself and protect yourself when you affirm yourself. So this is the capacity, also the same capacity of the capacity of consent. So this is a place where you work in self-affirmation and self-esteem and the ability to say what you want and to express it in context. Then we foster the ability of communication and intimacy. Intimacy is to share with others something which is very deep of you, and so to have a sense of belonging and connection. This is very important to have great sex. Then, if you have that, you can go to feel mutuality and playfulness in sexuality. So another degree of being able to enjoy and have pleasure. And last level, to work on what's the meaning of sexuality for you. What is it, on how spirituality can be involved in that? What do you look for in sexuality? So this is a suggestion for organizing clinical sexology objectives with clients, depending on their needs. Oops. So clinical sexology is political, and politics is at the core of our lives as identities. And so sexuality. So what do we do from now? And what I want to say is what we could do is organize ourselves. We need to build a network. We need to fight back. We need to work for freedom and justice. Many of you maybe want to be stealth. Some could be out as being involved in this fight back. And this is Work for Freedom project that I'm running with someone who is here in the audience, which name is Alain and lives in Argentina. We're working on a badge that you could put on electronic signature. If someone wants it, it's still on work in progress. It's not finished. If someone wants to have it, it's free. Just write me to come, and when it will be ready, I will send it to you. And so let's keep organized. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Denise. Thank you for raising such important question regarding sexual subjectivity and making the link between politics and psychology, because we often forget, social sciences, the link. We have the risk of doing psychologization, and we have the risk to do sociologization. One not forget the other. Thank you for that. Now I want to give the floor to our Italian friend Stefano Eleuteri, who is a psychologist and a sexologist with a focus. I mean, Stefano is a as we say, polyamorous, polyamorous of different disciplines and topics on sexuality. Sometimes it's difficult to follow him, but today he will focus on prison, because he works, and he researches about the life in prison in Italy. He's a researcher in the Mercatorum University in Rome, in Italy, and he's part of the leadership of WAS and of the European Federation of Sexology. So please, Stefano, the first part of your intervention, and then you will have another 3 minutes to speak about the World Sexual Health Day, in which you are in charge.
Thanks a lot, Alain, for the presentation and for the opportunity to talk about this topic that for me is really important. So when we talk of sexual justice, of course, considering also the opportunity of a specific context is for me particularly important. So we know that, as also Alain and Agata suggested before, that sexual rights are grounded in universal human rights, and they should be not limited by the Imprisonment Act, which means that the prisoners should have the same sexual rights as people outside the prison, and also the right to safe ways of living out sexuality in prison. But we know that as with many other areas of life, sexuality is really importantly affected by incarceration. So during this lecture, we are going to see some of the most difficult issues in maintaining sexual rights in this strange context. We know that it seems really difficult to reconcile the inviolability of the sexual right with the experience of incarceration, because of course fundamental rights like sexual freedom and also the separation from loved ones seems really difficult to consider in the context of sexual rights. We know that prisoners remain sexual persons, and of course the desire for physical relationships and sexual experiences does not end when the bars close behind them. So what we usually see is that inmates can become psychologically, emotionally, and also potentially physically distressed if they are deprived of sex. So, of course, sexuality maintain their expression in the institutions. But as we will see, sometimes they are more expressed in unacceptable ways than in acceptable one, because of course it is still difficult to maintain on one side the security and also the prescription that are connected with the possibility to stay in the prison and with the concept of the prison itself, with the possibility to maintain the right to have sexual health. So if we want to enhance and expand the concept of sexual health that the World Health Organization suggested in 2002 and put it in the context of prison, we should say that sexual health also in prison is not merely the absence of disease or dysfunction, like for example the absence of HIV that we will see is really a lot present in prison, neither is it the mere absence of sexual violence or abuse that sometimes is the way in which sexuality exists in the prison. But we should, from a sexual justice perspective, work in the possibility to give a possible access to a sexual health that could involve the whole person, from the physical, emotional, mental, and social aspects. So advancing sexual health in prison would mean to address all the needs of the prisoner from an holistic point of view. So, of course, one of the possible causes of prison inmates being an at-risk population for mental health is the difficulties that they encounter in having a satisfactory sex life. We see that sometimes they report emotional problems and may seek relief in alternative or less satisfactory for them or riskier ways. What we can see, for example, is an high rate of masturbation, even if in some contexts, for example, it is difficult also to maintain masturbation. We have experiences, for example, in the jail where I work, of cells with 6 prisoners. So you can imagine that also the aspect of privacy should be considered. The presence of consensual homosexual behavior as an alternative forms of sexual behaviors, and also what it is a lot problematic is that sometimes such behaviors are sometimes coercive and can lead also to the transmission of sexual diseases such as HIV, because of course these acts are maintained also not said, and there is not the possibility to talk about these issues. Also because in the rules of the prisons, for example, it is not possible to talk about homosexuality openly. For example, in the jail where I work, there is a section specific for open homosexual people. So, of course, the fact of maintaining this datum as something that is close, not give them the opportunity, for example, to ask for condoms or for something that could help them to avoid these. Of course, we know that the biggest possibility of sexual health would be the possibility to all prisoners to spend time with their spouses, partners, or family members in a private and intimate settings, with conjugal visits helping them to promote their emotional and physical well-being, and also potentially reducing the risk of recidivism. So the studies tend to report positive effects for inmates receiving visits, like reduced depressive symptoms in female and young male incarcerates, and reduction in rule breaking. Even if the studies suggest this, we know that still a few countries guarantees this. Here I report some of the different legislation. For example, we can see that in US prisons, consensual sexual contact is prohibited, whereas Finnish prisons permit consensual same-sex sexual contact, while the sexual contact between women and men is prohibited. Of course, the more difficult aspect of the sexual contact between women and men is the possibility to have a child, and of course the fact that having a child in some legislation is contrary to the possibility to remain in the jail. So it is seen as a possible way of going out of the jail. But for example, men and women usually are kept in separate facilities, and we can see that in many US prisons both masturbation and sexually explicit materials are banned, while, for example, in Finnish prisons, masturbation is allowed and the possession of some pornographic material, although the specific regulation can differ from one prison to another. So we know that the rules for conjugal visits vary by country. For example, in Italy, they proposed affection rooms that were criticized as red light cells, and still today we do not have a possibility of this aspect. We have some studies that still concentrate on the importance of sexual fulfillment for inmate well-being. For example, this one by Carcedo suggested that sexual satisfaction mental health association was only obtained for those who had remained sexually abstinent for at least the last 6 months. So in this way, the abstinent inmates were in a worse situation and experiencing also greater reactance to the loss of freedom with respect to their sexual life than sexually active inmates. So usually what we can see as activity in prison is made of contextual or situational homosexuality, masturbation, but we have also prostitution, for example, or also sex between inmates and prison staff, or sexual violence. So, of course, if we avoid the conjugal visits, there are all these aspects that are still a lot difficult to avoid. And we have always to take into consideration that as an effect of sex abstinence, the literature suggests that suicide attempts and self-harm acts are being put in act, risk also of sexual abuse, high rates of STIs, and of course lack of privacy and all the possible consequences of lack of protection of sexuality and affective also affect the partners of the inmates. So what I can say from the clinical perspective is that we see a lot of problems, for example, in the couple, and also a lot of negative situation in the inmates regarding this. I put a specific slide for female prisoners because male and female sections in the jail are really different. We can see that in the female sections, the consequences resulting from the deprivation of relationship present different characteristics than those in the male sections. We know that women, by their nature and cultural condition, do not experience usually the same anxiety and tension of men regarding the deprivation of sex, and also being mostly oriented towards expressions of affection, although there are lesbian relationships, and we can see that usually they are more tolerated. So what we can see is that they seek more affection and tenderness, but sometimes they could also bring a lot of jealousies. And what I saw is that this situation also created a lot of problems. And then, of course, we have to go also to the sexual identity because, as we said, sometimes this closure can have as a consequence a readjustment of one's personal identity, including the sexual identity, with a temporary or induced homosexuality that we perceive as an effect of adaptation to the prison environment. So still today, the sex and intimacy in prisons remains a deviant or subjugated knowledge, but we have a lot of projects like the Sex in Prison project that suggest the possibility that this could be, of course, a possibility to increase the not just the sexual health, but also the mental health of people. Also, this other study that is really recent of 2 years ago in a Finnish prison suggested that conjugal visits, but also sexual desire and gender were the stronger predictors of sexual activity. So, in conclusion, allowing individuals to express their sexuality in detention not only humanizes their condition, but also provides an opportunity for them and their connection to to strengthen affection and well-being, which would otherwise be deprived even from partners without sentences to serve. So the interrupting of this create a lot of possible degenerations, as we can see. So I close my lecture, and if we don't have a space for questions, of course, I leave my contacts so that you can contact me also privately. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefano, for this difficult topic, which raises a lot of ethical question. I mean, you know, we are all familiar with the work of Michel Foucault between surveillance and punishment. And is it only the privation of freedom and also a punishment? So, and what is the place of sexual health, you know, in the logic of punishment? And these are really important beyond, you know, the prevention of HIV infection and violence, of course. Just a couple of words. I want to give you the possibility to develop a couple of points in 2 minutes, because as everybody should know, the topic of the next World Sexual Health Day, which is on the 4th of September, will be about sexual justice. And Stefano is one of the supervisor of this project. So please, Stefano, can you explain to us what it will be about?
Yes, of course. I just want to present the World Sexual Health Days for the ones that do not know about these. Sorry, I'm going to present now. So we know that the World Sexual Health Day was started in 2010, thanks to the ex-president Rosemary Coates, that this year will receive also the gold medal. And the idea was to bring the global community together to promote sexual health and well-being. So every year we celebrate the World Sexual Health Day on each September 4th, but every organization has the opportunity to present itself its own event, because we want to raise this possibility for everyone in order to give the power to the sexual rights and the sexual health. You can see that we had a lot of different teams every year. So we passed from the first team of Let's Talk About It. Last year, for example, we talked of a relationship. We talked also of COVID. So every year we try to concentrate of something that it is important for us, as was in that specific year, and that we perceive that it is important also regarding the political situation and the global situation. So this year, we invite you all to celebrate with us. The theme that we decided this year, together with the Sexual Justice Initiative coordinated by Alain Giami, is Sexual Justice, what can we do? So the possibility that, of course, together we find also a way to establish a new voice about sexual justice, giving the possibility that we can avoid all the problematic political aspects that we can see, that Agata, for example, presented for Poland, but I can see also myself from the Italy perspective, unfortunately. And we know that also in the US, we are having a lot of negative issues that, of course, will impact on a lot of other countries. So we want to establish a bottom-up perspective and voice that can bring the possibility to give new power to the sexual justice. So we will wait you all for the webinar that we are going to organize, but also for all the events that you want to organize. For everything, please contact me again.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Stefano. Thank you, Stefano. I'm sure the World Sexual Health Day will be a success, and I hope it will help sexual justice. Esther Corona will give us a couple of comments about what was said.
Thank you very much, Alain. Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge how Alain presented, in a way, a very negative environment that we live in right now. But on the other hand, he also presented sexual justice initiative and working in sexual justice as a beacon of hope in these very dire situations. I think that we have been hearing, I don't want to summarize because it will be a major task, and I think the webinar will be available, and I encourage all of you to go back to them because, for instance, listening and having a framework such as was presented by Ricardo Hernández Forcada is very helpful in placing sexual initiative within our work, and this is something that also will be referred into our Sexual Health Day. So I more or less draw out from the very important broad situations and specific situations such as Canada, Poland, clinical issues, and specific populations like incarcerated populations, ideas or strategies. What can we do? What is the task that we have to follow now? First of all, I think that we have to examine and identify what sexual injustices are present in our own situations, how they affect ourselves, and how we are subjects and how we also are part of carrying out sexual injustices in our field. I think it's very important that we get involved, and this also alludes to what Denise was saying, bridging the subjective and our social environment. Place our own work within this context and realize that we are political, yes, and politics is not a bad word. It's something that is as inherent to our nature as sexuality. So I think that this being able to have to be able to step beyond a neutral position is absolutely important for our work. And lastly, I want to be reminded of Jeffrey Wicks and other major thinkers that have, when approached and asked, what should we do? How do you see what is happening in the world right now? And we have been told that this reaction, the force of this reaction, is the measure also of what we have gained. We have walked ahead. We have a framework of sexual rights, which is placed within human rights, and that is absolutely important. We're not talking about something new or something which is different to human rights. So I think that it's very important that we must work to keep what we have gained, to hold our ground in every forum that we step in every time that we work in this field, considering precisely all the intersections. It's not different from environmental justice. It's no different from reproductive justice. It's all part of this wanting to achieve a better world and better and well-being for people. So in my own point of view, and what I can take home from this excellent webinar is the call for action to keep on walking towards sexual justice as I said before, a beacon of hope and something that can give us a better perspective for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther, for this comment. I would like to add something, and also in response to Denise Medico. One of the ideas of this project is to establish an international network of collaborative partners, to exchange ideas, to advertise situation of injustice, and to share action together. Okay. So for now, I want to thank all the participants for their efforts to come and the work they do to elaborate this project. And I'm very pleased I'm happy of the seminars, of the webinars that we have been going on together. I want to thank all the participants. We were more than 100 people participating from different countries of the world, which is also very satisfying for us. We invite you, for those who have money, to come to Australia for the next WAS Congress in mid-June, where the declaration will be discussed, where maybe we shall have a consultation about sexual justice, but don't worry, we are going to stay in touch. Voilà. Thank you for participation, and see you soon in a better world. Thank you.